welcome to this week's episode of Where Peter Is Live. I'm joined this week by Paul Fahey and Melinda Ribnek. Paul's back.
Hey.
And we have a new guest today. We have Patric Peters, who is a new contributor to our site, longtime fan. He's seen him in the comments on our streams before. But Patrick wrote an awesome post for us this week, so we wanted to have him on to talk about it. Mike Lewis, as you probably notice, is not with us today. He's recovering from his glaucoma procedure earlier this week. So keep Mike in your prayers, and maybe he's going to comment while we're on here. We'll see. But Paul is going to open us up with a prayer today. So
in the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, thank you so much for all that you've done for us. We thank you for this Easter season. We ask you to please send us your Holy Spirit, that the truth of who you are and your love for us may become present to us again and may transform our hearts. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen.
Amen. So we promoted this show as the unsexy Easter edition of the live stream. We've had a couple of posts on our site this week, one which I wrote and one which Patrick wrote, which both had sexy in the title. And Mike was a little wondering who approved those headlines. But so we've had some spicy takes on the site this week, and it's been Easter week, so we're still in the octave of Easter. So I wanted to ask you guys how your Easter is going. Like, is it going? Does it feel like Easter?
It does. I have been off of Twitter a lot this week, which has definitely felt like Easter. No, but it's all a blur. But the kids and I have been doing Easter egg hunts and a little bit of champagne in the yard, bringing the bunny out. We do have a bunny, like I mentioned. And if you've noticed on my Twitter page, I've only posted 1,000 photos. But it has been a wonderful week, I think, just to sit back and for me, I've kind of put a lot of things on hold. Like, okay, kind of like the world sucks in a lot of ways, but like right now it's just a couple of holy days just to kind of rejoice. So that's where I've been at. I'm very grateful for these last couple of days. But I noticed that you guys have been doing real work and actually putting stuff on the site. So
the site's been operative this week. Patrick, how's your Easter going?
It's good. I was able to go to the Easter Vigil here.
I love Easter Vigil.
And I only recently started going back to Mass because of COVID within like the last few months or so. So it was a really nice experience to be able to do that. But other than the actual churchy stuff, I feel like the weather here has been reminding me a lot of just Easter and spring. And I don't think I even know where you guys are, but...
Yeah, where are you, Patrick? Where are you?
I'm in Bowling Green, Kentucky. It's like 60 miles north of Nashville.
Yeah, I'm really familiar with that area. Yeah,
okay.
It's nice. You kind of get the 4 seasons there.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm in California, so it's always Easter. Sorry, but true.
Yeah, I'm jealous of that.
Yeah, I'm a little northwest of you. I live in St. Louis, Missouri, so...
Okay.
Yeah, I'm up in Michigan, and we actually get all 4 seasons because you don't really enjoy, the nice weather if you don't have 6 months of terrible weather.
No, you do. Actually, trust me, you do.
Melinda knows her California, it's dreary permacloud everywhere else, and Melinda's posting beautiful pictures of California hills.
The sky is so blue. The sun is blinding here, but I'm all about it. And I do feel a little bad for it, but it doesn't stop me from shamelessly bragging every other day. So yeah. So happy Easter.
Yeah. We went back to Mass for the first time on Easter, and Patrick, we were kind of staying away for a long time because of COVID and stuff. And we went to Mass in the gymnasium, and it just it was funny to me how, I'm not super liturgically obsessive anymore, but the very long story, but it's the very pared down Mass in chairs that are spaced 6 feet apart in a gym with the portable altar and lectern and stuff. It's just so basic, but everyone there was really grateful for it. Really cooperative. And after Mass, Father's thanking everyone for being, compliant and that he asked for help stacking the chairs, and people like immediately during the exit hymn are like stacking chairs.
Oh, no.
So I'm like, you know what? Usually I would be like all complainy about this, but it's Easter, hallelujah. So
Is there time for a tangent?
yes.
Okay.
Do a tangent.
So the Easter Vigil is my absolute favorite. And I'm the director of RCIA at my parish, so I get to it's even better to go to the Easter Vigil. But before I worked at the parish, my wife and I were part of a Catholic community, the Neo-Catechumenal Way, and they have specific permissions for their liturgies, but they have an all-night Easter Vigil. And by all night, I mean it starts around midnight or 1 a.m. and goes until 6 or 7 in the morning. Oh. And it's really, really pared down. So it's usually in a hall, and it's usually only 20 or 30 people, and they have an altar and a candle and a baptismal font, and it's amazing. It's the greatest thing.
Do they do all readings, more readings than usual? How does it go all night?
There's already 20 readings in the video.
Yeah.
So, how do they make it last?
So
3 times as long though.
They sing everything they possibly can to drag it out.
Wow.
And a part of the permission for their liturgies is opportunity for the community to give they're called echoes, so not homilies, but more like, how did this reading strike me, right? And then the homily usually brings in what people shared, right, and then expounds upon it. And there's 3 homilies. They did the first 3 readings, then homily, and the next 3 readings, homily, and then through the gospel and homily. I mean, they drag it out, but there's something really incredible about keeping vigil all night.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really awesome.
Oh, I'm sure the trads will write us letters for that. That's just what we need. Is more liturgical questions. All right.
Moving on. Okay, Patric, you wrote a post for us this week. It was Untangling Sex from Same-Sex Love. So I want to just introduce everyone to you, since we've already talked about how you're from Kentucky, but you are a graphic designer, writer, and you told me you're a wannabe theologian. You graduated from Western Kentucky University with a BA in Religious Studies and Graphic Design, and you're currently working on an MA in Theology from Franciscan University in Steubenville.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And you said you live in Bowling Green, and you work as a catechist and member of the young adult core team, and you have a blog. So everyone should go visit this. It's smellysheep.wordpress.com, and I want you to tell us where that name came from, because
I think cool. I was probably just trying to. This is maybe 5 years ago or so. So I was trying to just find an alliteration first of all. So I was trying to think of, and then sheep is a very Christian symbol, followers of Christ. And then I thought, well, I try to be a follower of Christ, but I have difficulties, like anyone else, or I might struggle with church teaching or fall into sin and all that. So I thought, I'm basically a smelly sheep, I'm not
That's
perfect yet. Yeah.
I like it because it just reminds me of one of the areas I think we've gone a little wrong maybe in the American church is this constant call to smell like the sheep, right? Mm-hmm. So and they talk about this a lot with clergy, but also with us lay people as we minister to each other as well.
Yeah.
Smelling like the sheep, it's such an important call. And the way you did it was so humble, because you're I'm the smelly sheep.
Yeah, I didn't even make that connection, but okay.
Yeah, but that's what I think of it. Pope Francis's constant call to us to go among and to smell like the sheep, but not necessarily just like you, Patric. Because if we all follow your example, we realize we all are smelly sheep. So yeah, I like that a lot.
Cool, thanks.
Yeah.
So your post was really brought about by your response to the recent CDF response to some questions about the blessing of gay civil unions. So I just want to ask first, what was your personal response to the news about that CDF response and when you first heard about it?
Yeah, well, I think my response was, I guess you could say, twofold, because I usually get headlines like that filtered through other news services. And so I was frustrated with both how people reacted to it in general, and how they were phrasing it, maybe against Pope Francis, on like one side of a like political ideology, or the exact same thing, but maybe on the other side. So I was frustrated there with just the reaction, but then my own reaction also to the actual document itself when I read it, I came away from it frustrated because it seemed to do that common thing that church documents do when they talk about homosexuality and gay people, which is they focus on like the moral act of sex, and they seem to kind of forget about what all else the relationship might involve between two people. And thankfully that document actually did include, which I'm sure we might get to, but the phrase about the positive elements, like admitting to positive elements in some same-sex relationships. But basically, when you read the document, I feel like you come away with it thinking, you know, the church is against this because same-sex sexual activity is bad. And that's something I always hear, and it's just kind of frustrating. So I don't know.
Yeah. So it sounds like your reaction was mixed. Like, well, there's this bit about positive elements, but ultimately it's still seeming to fall into this error that you point out in your post of kind of conflating, or I don't want to say that you're accusing them of error, but fall into this kind of trap in how we talk about or think about like gay relationships that always equate them with sexual activity. Would you say that that's fair? Okay.
Yeah, I would say I came away frustrated from reading the document myself. But then at the same time, I had this feeling of like needing to kind of defend. So it's kind of weird, but I kind of had this feeling of needing to defend where the church was actually coming from.
Yeah.
And so like people who were trying to say like Pope Francis is a hypocrite, or, you know, the church, you know, hates gay people, or all that kind of reaction, the very simplistic reaction. I kind of at the same time wanted to defend what the church is saying, kind of, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And that came out really in your post. You highlighted the two kinds of responses that we all saw really to the CDF letter, which was, you know, you said on the right, there's this, haha, Pope Francis vindicates the teaching. You can't bless sin. Yeah. And that meme that was going around everywhere. That was really just completely insensitive. And then on the other side, people just totally rejecting Pope Francis. And it sounds like as someone who really loves the church, like this is kind of a cheap shot at a church that I love. I mean,
right. Yeah.
I also, you know, I was wondering, you know, when we first, as a group of, you know, straight married Catholics, the rest of us, when we read the CDF letter, we saw, oh, wow, they are pointing out positive elements in these relationships, or positive elements underlying the desire for someone to have their union blessed. And that's really innovative. That's really new. That seems different. You know, that seems like a shift in how the church is approaching gay Catholics. So would you say that like helped with your interpretation or like reception of the letter? Would you say like you had as positive a response to that element of it as maybe others did who aren't like,
yeah,
like,
well,
you know,
right. Well, I think mostly I was looking at it like I'm used to, since I would identify as like gay and Catholic, I'm kind of used to that language anyway. But since I'm really interested in theology, I kind of have my own way of like nuancing things where I don't get offended that easily. Like it's almost like, well, I know the church actually says more than what this is saying to me. So in that specific instance, it didn't really affect me much. However, I was able to pull that out kind of as a way to say, look, even this small piece that the document's willing to grant to the positive aspects of some same-sex relationships, that shows that can be like drawn out more, and like we can actually like focus in on that more than the church has in the past. So like, in other words, even though I kind of already knew that there is such a thing as like positive elements in relationships besides, it's not just like sex in every single positive relationship. That's something that not everyone is used to hearing. And that's definitely not something that I considered like when I was first starting to think about these things like 10 years ago or so. Yeah. And that was really babbling and kind of going all over the place. But
so the focus of your article was that we make all relationships about sex. The pastor that I had when I was in college, he would write booklets for his congregation about everything from virtue or prayer or, anyways, he wrote one about intimacy that really like opened my mind to a lot of stuff. But he talked about how every human being needs intimacy and every human being needs physical intimacy. And he's like, but the problem is that we've collapsed physical intimacy to holding hands and sex, right? And like, there's nothing in between those two things. And so like his perspective came at a time in like my own like spiritual formation where, I was really caught up in the conservative culture war stuff. I think his writing really like helped prevent me from falling entirely in, with the more hardline conservative position. But I remember about 5 or 6 years ago going to a courage conference in my state, and they had, I think they had Eve Tushnet, who you mentioned in your article there, and that was seen as almost like a scandalous thing. Like I hadn't realized how much of a debate this idea that chaste but committed same-sex relationships, like that even being thrown out as a possibility, how controversial that was, in part thanks to my pastor. But I really resonated with her position and likewise resonate with your position a lot. So I'm curious if you have like a journey or an evolution with your own thought with that.
Yeah, thanks for asking that, because I think Eve Tushnet really helped to like evolve my understanding on the whole thing, because like growing up, when I started to realize like I have these feelings, also paralleled my like renewed sense of faith and interest in theology. And so I had kind of like this new conflict, and throughout high school and undergrad at college, it would always seem like I couldn't be both, because like I was wavering between one or the other. And part of that was precisely because of the way the church has phrased the issue around sex. So I don't know if we were going to get into this a little more later, but can I go ahead and bring up the intrinsically disordered thing?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
So like, I know there's a lot of like controversy, like people don't like that term and all of that. So like the catechism and other church documents refer to homosexuality as a tendency or a temptation or orientation as intrinsically disordered, because the fact of the actual moral act of same-sex sex is intrinsically disordered. It's not ordered to what the church would teach that is the true purpose of sex, right? Mm-hmm. So, but the problem with that is, and someone like me who hears that, is that even though, people in the church will be like, well, we're not saying gay people are disordered. We're saying that, just the temptation or whatever is disordered. But when you have this like tangled notion of like sex and relationship, it starts to sound like no matter what feelings I have for like another guy, or like the desire to have some kind of relationship with another guy, close relationship, it's almost like something ticks off in my head that says, well, no, that's like intrinsically disordered. Like all those feelings that are intertwined with that are bad. So it's like, because the church
about it,
because the church doesn't really make that distinction well enough, I don't think, or at least for me. that's why I always felt like, okay, either gay or Catholic, not both. And so when I finally came to Eve Tushnet's way of thinking, which was there is this difference, and in the church's history, there are examples of ways of loving that aren't just romantic or center around sex. That was kind of like eye-opening for me, I guess. And that was only a few years ago. So until then, it was really this back and forth thing, which wasn't healthy.
One thing we've talked about on the lives in the past is the issue. I think it was Rachel, you and Paula and Mike and I were on that show about how, we really don't talk about like the disordered sexuality in marriages. We assume that if, you're oftentimes in these circles, if you're, having the right kind of sex, that somehow that's all that matters, is that you're married, straight, and non-contracepting. And as I'm hearing you talk, Patric, all I'm thinking is, wow, there are sometimes my desires, my even sexual desires, are disordered. And yet somehow like I can evade feeling that stigma, right? Somehow like I can like say, well, I know these orders are not good, or these desires are not good, right? But like I evade being able to internalize them to such an extent. And I wonder, like, if we had more open and honest, frank discussions about like disordered heterosexual desires and that kind of thing, and even within marriages, would it make it feel less stigmatizing for when gay Catholics have homosexual desires? Like, do you think that that would help the conversation? Because the reality is that all of us have disordered drives, right? All of us. And so the issue is, how do we not let those disordered drives like internalize to the point that we feel like we're unlovable, or we're somehow, worse than everybody, or like there's something so innately wrong with us? How do we see that as a sin that's separate from us, or a disorder that's separate from us? And I'm talking about heterosexual disorders as well, and not internalize it so much that it separates us from God ultimately. And I wonder if having more open conversations about heterosexual disorders would help that not be so stigmatizing for homosexual disorders.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. When we do stick with the word like disorders, like you said, we got to keep it on the, like we're talking about the precise moral meaning of like the sexual activity part. And so it's almost like I want the church to be able to say, look, these things are disordered, but your desire to love another person, or your desire to love another person of the same sex, that's not disordered. And I feel like that was kind of missing from my understanding. And that's where, what you just said, like I, and I guess so many others, just internalize it as like, I'm a disordered person, Mm-hmm. So yeah, I think that makes sense. That definitely, yeah, like I haven't thought about that before, about how maybe straight people aren't as quick to like internalize it. They can just kind of say, oh, that's not a good thing I thought of, or that's not a good temptation or whatever. But yeah, so I think that would make a lot of sense to pull it together.
Yeah, the key seems to be like, how do we separate like that disordered desire from an understanding of the person, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I mean, with that, like in terms of intimacy and even like the tendency of our desires, like the church has traditionally defined that as concupiscence, like the desire for sin, basically. That's concupiscence. And that's something that everyone really struggles with. And I think what we're noticing here is that we don't have the same level of like shame or maybe separation from one another based on that as we do when it comes to LGBT Catholics and LGBT sexuality versus sexuality generally. Like, I think it is interpreted or understood maybe differently by different people. So maybe if we focused on what rightly ordered love looks like, what chastity is, then we could have a more common basis to really proceed in terms of like considering creative options for ministering to people who have felt so excluded in the church because of their sexuality. And Paul, you were going to say something. So
yeah, I was going to say that. I mean, I've had to confront over the past few years, and it's been a grace to confront like my own homophobia, especially coming out of the more conservative, like culture war, like place that I was in. But something I've noticed that I used to believe and had internalized. So like, I wrote a short piece when that CDF document came out, just kind of summarizing the main points. And one of the things I highlighted was that the document goes out of its way to say that same-sex sexual unions can't be blessed, but same-sex persons certainly can, right? Thereby saying that persons are not disordered, right? That's what this document was saying. And so I said that very bluntly. And someone commented saying, well, but we got to clarify that like the desires are disordered. Like there was this instant jump to say, but gay people are different, right? It's like we couldn't just stop and say people are not disordered. And I know that's a tendency that I used to have, at least in my own thoughts. And it's something that I see as quite prevalent within the church, at least in my circles of the church. So, yeah, I do think that, and not just, I think we need to talk about disordered desires and not just LGBT issues, so that we're able to better internalize the difference between our concupiscence, which we all have, which is disordered, which is from sin. But part of what makes us Catholic is that sin doesn't totally destroy our dignity, right? Yeah, and that's not a Catholic belief. That's a Protestant belief. Catholic belief is that we're always, we still have our dignity. We still have our value no matter what. We're not disordered. So yeah, I'm not sure where I was going with that, but I agree, Melinda. That's where I was going with that.
Well, yeah, Patric, I'd love to hear from you. In your article, you talk about these chaste relationships, right? I'd love to hear a little more about what that looks like and what you refer to as like creative ministering. Yeah,
that subject, which I was also first, introduced to by Eve Teschnett, and there are others like Wesley Hill, who I think is an Anglican. It's interesting because it's a cool thing to discover in the history of the church that, there are committed relationships that aren't not just marriage and all of that. And so the discovery by like gay people of that kind of thing, who also want to be faithful to like their church's teaching, it can give them sort of like a hope, like a way forward. But at the same time, I think Eve Teschnett says this, like, I don't want to speak for her, but like, I think I've read it and seen her in her videos. Like, she also doesn't want to set this up as a way that kind of like solves the problem, because it's like, it might put too much like expectation, like just as much expectation on the gay person. Like, I'm going to find my one good, true, committed person, just like there might be a lot of pressure on people to get married to. Like, I'm going to find my one true love and all that. So she doesn't want to turn that into an idol either. Like she calls marriage has sometimes been like an idolized in our society.
It definitely has.
Sure.
But like when someone is in a place where you do find yourself in a relationship and like a gay relationship, but you want to be Christian, I think Eve's insight and this idea of like chaste relationship is, you don't have to get rid of all of these like positive elements, and it's like not wrong to want to love someone. And like I think Paul said at the beginning, like there's this intrinsic human desire for like intimacy. I know I forgot his name, but there's a Protestant gay Christian who argues more for like full inclusion, like acceptance of like homosexual behavior and all of that. But he uses the whole man, or the Genesis quote, like man's not meant to be alone, kind of as his way forward. Obviously we wouldn't go all the way with like, you know, same-sex marriage and all that, at least in the Catholic tradition. But the point's the same, is like, we can't live alone. We can't live in isolation. And I think American culture especially is like, you're expected to like marry someone in order to not feel alone anymore. And so I don't know if that's really, it's kind of,
well, yeah, that's in
aspects.
Catholic cultures too. You know, this idolization of like marriage as well, that the pinnacle can be, you know, to get married and to, yeah. Rachel, I think you were about to say something.
I was just going to say that, you know, we do seem to like idolize these like individual one-on-one relationships, including marriage, you know, because that's kind of one of the last remaining relationships that we have in this postmodern culture with the plague of loneliness and everything. But everyone does need a context of like robust relationships of all different kinds to help them really flourish. And so I kind of wonder if part of the solution too is like, everybody needs to understand the need for friendships of different kinds, for relationships of different kinds that feed us in different ways, and not to put kind of all of our hope in one relationship to help us realize who we are and be the way we are closest to any other human being on earth or anything like that. But then the other thing I was thinking of too was a lot of hesitancy around maybe the spiritual friendship idea. Seems to be like, well, we can't endorse that because that might be risky, like because people have sexual attractions, and so you know, you're kind of playing with fire. You know, what if people mess up? But it seems like that doesn't like allow for really how we understand people to grow in virtue or to grow like in the Christian life, which, you know, you sometimes do have to like risk. Yeah. Messing up even. So, you know, as you're growing, like, know that setbacks are going to happen, but that God is merciful and we will always seek to do better and cooperate with grace the best we can and continue kind of on the journey. And that the fear of like what might happen in some situations it seems to hold back like the creativity of the church's ministry. And that was one of the thoughts I had in reading your article. I wasn't sure.
Yeah. Actually, I want to say something real quick on that, because it's actually something else I got from Eve too. I keep getting things from her, but again, I don't want to speak for her, but I think this came from her, is that the whole idea, these kind of relationships, even chaste relationships, might lead one to sin, or like would be an occasion of sin. She put it nicely, I think, and I really feel this too, is well, without that relationship, think about the kind of occasion of sin that might be there. And what she's getting at is, I guess it just depends on the person, but like what I understood her saying is like the kind of sins that might open up if you don't have that kind of person to love, that companion. Like for me, for example, like I used to say, I went back and forth from being like, okay, I got to accept either my sexuality or my faith. Well, it's like, well, if I can't love someone, if I can't have like, you know, a boyfriend or a committed relationship or whatever, well, then I guess I'm just going to get rid of my faith. And then then it seemed like no standard was there anymore. And so it's almost like I was led to sin in other ways. And it's like, kind of like you said, pick your battles or take risk. I don't know how to make a general principle of it, but at least for me, I could definitely see like if there was no option, no opportunity to be able to like love someone in a chaste way or even a committed way, like even share like a same home together or something, like I could see myself like really, I don't know. I think some people just need that closeness with other people. And I don't know if I would be able to live my faith very well if I was just by myself. And does that make sense? Another kind of nuance on the whole.
That does make complete sense. You know, I think you're articulating like really vulnerably, like the human longing for companionship and encouragement. And, you know, like I grieve for people who feel that they don't have like someone to encourage them in day-to-day life or to affirm, you know, because a lot of marriage is that, and a lot of friendship is affirming and listening and empathizing. And I think it's right to point out that people might be led to despair, or to, losing their faith, if they feel that kind of close, loving relationship is completely like off the table. Just you don't deserve that. And it does seem like this is a huge area where the church is challenged to really be creative. And one thing I thought of as you were talking about, I'm not sure about a general principle. Well, who also says that is Pope Francis, in Amoris Laetitia, like multiple times. I don't want to articulate a general principle. He kind of refuses to give general principles sometimes because discernment is so important in everyone's life. And the church offers ideals and offers teaching, and then it's up to us to interpret it and apply it in our formed consciences in our own circumstances. And so hopefully this challenge does kind of move us in a good direction. Was there anything else that you felt you wanted to say today? I know we covered a lot, and I just wanted to make sure that you felt like you got out what you wanted to share.
No, I was definitely very thankful. I think to end, I would just say, like, no matter what a given Catholic or Christian would come down on this kind of issue, well, I guess specifically Catholics, if we're going to admit that as the Catholic Church, God formed this, divine society for like the inclusion of all people, like if it's made to be like God's revelation on earth is going to be found in the Catholic Church, if we really believe that, then it can't make sense that a whole group of people can't find like a home there. Like, I know like the theology is messy, and like original sin, people will say is why people are gay, or blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. But the fact is there are people that are gay or trans or whatever. And like the church has got to come to grips with that some way or another. Or else it can't really be Catholic. Like it can't be universal if it's not. And I don't mean just like inclusion, like everyone's welcome. I mean,
like a real home.
Yeah, it's got to actually make sense for everyone. Like if I'm here in church and I'm like, literally the only reason I'm here is because I'm scared of going to hell. Like if that's the only reason, then like
that's not a home.
That's not. It doesn't seem like the faith is working very well. But yeah, I guess that would be the main thing, is that pastoral accompaniment, all that, it's got to go forward to make people find a home in the church. So.
The church is the mother, and mothers make homes for people, right? Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. And I would encourage everyone to go read Patric's post. It should be in the comments underneath wherever you're viewing this now, if you haven't read it already. And we look forward to maybe talking to you again, Patric, or reading more from you. But
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for coming on too, because I've just been listening this time and like just learning. It means so much to hear your perspective. So thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you for the opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Patric.
Thanks.
All right. See you later. All right. I did that successfully. Sorry, I was really worried about the tech, how that was going to work out. Okay, so we're going to turn to Easter now, I think.
Oh, good, because Paul, I wanted to tell you, you were talking a minute ago about how we have to we were talking about how we have to separate like our disorder from like ourselves, like innately, right? Like we're not defined by our sin. And all I could think about too was like Pope Francis, okay, help me out here, Urbi et Orbi, right? For Easter, in which the dude was like listing all the sins of the world.
Like, you know Pope Francis the dude. Did you know? Okay, just checking. We're really casual around here with our, His Holiness.
Yeah, His Holiness. Okay, sorry. That was, Anyway, what I meant to say, how our Holy Father was listing the sins of the world. I mean, he's got like Lebanon, Syria. You're seeing all of this like destruction, and he's talking about like the wars and the hatred, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's Easter. But it's time for bunnies. No. But the point was, I love that, like, this is the beauty of our faith, is that like the sins, like we don't, not to generalize too much, but like, I think of like the Protestant cross without the Christ on it, right? Without the body on it. And I think like this is the thing, like we're not defined by our sin. Like we can like oh my gosh, help me out here. Where am I going with this? The idea is that like here's this Easter message, and in it lists a lot of the sins of the world, and yet it ends with like this ability to still find like joy, right? Like as Christians, we don't have to fear putting, the body of Christ on a crucifix. We don't have to fear like sin in itself in that way. Like we're not defined by it. Like we're defined by the love of God. So we don't have to hide from sufferings and sins and all of these things. If we really lived our faith to like the fullest understanding, then we would see that like our concupiscence, our sins, the sufferings, they don't even begin to touch how good we are because we're made in the image of God and how loved we are. And that's the beauty thing about, sometimes we tease Catholics all the time because, Catholics can be hardcore with our imagery and like our suffering, theology or whatever, but it is the truth. Like even our Easter message is like, there's the suffering of the world, but there's still joy in the risen Christ and who we are, despite the brokenness of the fall of man. And so that's
that was the conclusion of like the blessing was where there's death, now there is life. Where there's suffering, the risen Lord transfigures it. Like, and every Easter they do the Urbi et Orbi. I think Christmas too. It's the Urbi et Orbi. It's like Latin to the city and to the world. So, and so I've been to the Urbi et Orbi. I don't like to humble brag about my trip to Italy for Holy Week.
This is the third maybe time you've brought it up.
I know, it's so important.
I mean, I'm not counting. I'm just letting you know.
But I love it. Okay, so I'm yelling because I'm so excited. Okay, so the Pope stands on the balcony where they only stand like after the papal election, the like special one with the big one. Usually he's at like the side window, and it's just
but
like
Rachel knows because she's been 3 times. He's in the
No, I'm not saying that. So, but like every Easter they bring up like it's like the laundry list of everything that's terribly going wrong in the world, and then the last paragraph is, like, this is a tradition but this is like the tradition of the church. You're right. Like the Catholic Church proclaimed to the world, like, hey, everything's terrible. We know, and Jesus saved it. So
there you go. Exactly.
But I cut you off in my enthusiasm, Paul.
No, that's our faith, right? Like we have the Triduum, which is one liturgy over 3 days. And we celebrate all of it all at once. We celebrate the Passion and death as well as the resurrection all at the same time.
And we call it Good Friday.
Yeah, it's not Bad Friday, but it's
good.
But it's also sad. So I was talking with someone over the weekend. It was on Holy Saturday, and they were talking about how they had, one of their parents passed away last year really suddenly, and they were talking about their own reflections on death and stuff, and how for Christians like death is both hopeful and I think the word he used was absurd at the same time, right? It's absurd. It's also hopeful. And as we were talking, it reminded me of the story of the Raising of Lazarus, where you have Jesus there and he's been dead for 4 days. And it says Jesus weeps. Even though we know minutes later he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. Even though Jesus knows that minutes later he's going to raise Lazarus from the dead, Jesus still weeps at the absurdity of death, right? Mm-hmm. Like we have to have both, because death ought not be, and suffering ought not be, and sin ought not be. They're absurd things that that's appropriate to mourn over, right? Mm-hmm. But at the same time, Christ took all those onto himself and made them paths to greater grace at the same time. It's like it's not even a tension. It's like just both. We need to have both.
Well, like the whole happy fault of Adam. We just heard that in the Easter Vigil Mass. Like, I'm like, happy fault of Adam. No.
Thanks for eating that apple, guys.
Way to go, Adam. Great job, bud.
It really is like it's not like a tension like with poles that are pulling us one way or another. It's always both things at the same time. Like it's always death and resurrection. Yeah. We have to somehow recall both. But I think what is really challenging And maybe what the pandemic has reminded us all of is that, the resurrection happened and we're all going to rise from dead, and in the future there will be no suffering anymore, but we still live kind of in Holy Saturday. We still, as we recall that the resurrection is going to happen, we are still living in this fallen world with all this suffering, and we have to survive in it with hope as we look forward to that day.
Which means mourning.
Right.
Death and suffering. Like, that's a part of that.
I mean, me personally, I'm putting that stuff aside for a couple of days and forgetting about it and drinking champagne in my yard with my kids and Bunny. But I am also fully aware that I've got like maybe one more day left before I have to join the real world again. But Rachel, I will say your piece you wrote, I can't remember the title now, but the line and it stuck with me all throughout Lent was the one about the weeds growing together. And allowing, Which one was it?
It was on patience and conversion. It was about the conversion of this 20th century guy named Haywood Brown. I don't remember what the title actually was.
Yeah, but it sounds patience and conversion, right? Which is probably why it was so speaking to me, because it's like, hey, slow down, Mel. This idea that that we do take some time to celebrate like that Easter Sunday, right? But you're exactly right. We are living in a Holy Saturday, and it can become very overwhelming to see all of the injustices, especially that are coming to a light right now in the world. And so I think for a couple of days, to be able to take a break from that, I hope that a lot of the viewers, and I hope a lot of people have been able to do that. But at the same time, it is also a real thing that we're not there yet. And it is a time and a place to mourn too, that Holy Saturday of waiting and understanding that, the sins and the brokenness of the world cost. And so, and even, again, we just had Patric on, but thinking about it in so many different issues and so many different people's lives, all of the pains of the brokenness from the fall of Adam, all of that, like it is very, heavy. And so I think if we can get to a point where we do start to talk about this in exactly this kind of both and way, maybe as much as we can, trying to kind of alleviate some of the tension we always seen between what is and what should be, even in how we look at our own brokenness and how we look at the brokenness of the world. I just wonder if that might be like some ticket to being able to kind of exist in some of the joy too, that we're called to.
I mean, there's always problems when we deny one or not emphasize the other, right? Like if a loved one passes away, or like if a friend of mine has a loved one pass away, if I ignore their sorrow, then like I'm denying. I suck.
That's not cool, Paul. Don't do that.
Gotta acknowledge it.
You have to acknowledge it. But also, if you ignore the hope, then all you have is despair and nihilism, right? Like, we don't have a prosperity gospel, and we don't have despair. And the only way to avoid those is to embrace both of those things.
To embrace both, to allow yourself to feel both. And to not feel, but to experience both. Yeah.
And I personally was struck. I was listening to the Easter Vigil homily that Pope Francis gave, because I feel like that's like his glory moment every year. Like he saves his good content for the Easter Vigil. But he talked about this, and he talked specifically like to whoever was listening. And he said, dear sister, dear brother, if on this night you're experiencing an hour of darkness, a day that has not yet dawned, a light dimmed or a dream shattered, go open your heart with amazement to the message of Easter. Do not be afraid. He has risen. He awaits you in Galilee. And he gives hope. He says, your expectations will not remain unfulfilled. Your tears will be dried. Your fears will be replaced by hope. For the Lord always goes ahead of you. Okay, I'm going to cry reading that.
I know, because that's the message we all want to hear.
That's what we all need to hear. Yes. And it's not dismissive of the darkness that people encounter. It's saying I see where you are. It is really hard. But don't be afraid of what hope Christ offers you.
And that's something that Pope Francis is really good at. I remember this was a few years ago. He gave an address to, I think, a group of some type of group that worked with maybe like terminally ill kids. I mean, just like a really, really tough group.
Yeah.
And he said, people ask me about, the problem of suffering. How could God let these children go through this suffering?
Mm-hmm.
And he was like, I don't have an answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I appreciated that honesty. He didn't even attempt to answer.
Mm-hmm.
He's like, but the reality is that God suffers with us. And he promises that he's going to bring something greater from it. And that was his response. Like, I loved that, because he was able to meet people in that question without dismissing the question or trying to answer the question. But no, that's a good question, and we need to sit with that question.
Yeah.
I think it's just so uncomfortable to sit with sometimes, like it's so different for us to see or hear a pastor who's like, that's a tough question. The answer to that is the cross. Because so often people are like, you know what, this is uncomfortable. I want to give them an answer that they're happy with and then move on, so that they can get through this. But sometimes what we really need to hear is just, that's tough. And the answer is Jesus. And that's all.
Well, that's tough. Yeah. That's tough. But then, that's tough, but I'm here with you. Like, we can also practice entering into people's suffering with them. And me being here with you isn't going to alleviate your suffering. But then one day, like you said, one day, we will see the purpose and the fulfillment of that. But yeah, oftentimes entering into someone's suffering with them, it's not going to give, a solution to the problem, but we know that it holds real value.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's the model of Jesus, right? Like, Jesus's response to suffering is, I'll bring a greater good from it, but also I have suffered and will suffer with you. I mean, one of the things we believe about the incarnation is that God experienced, he didn't have to die on a cross. Jesus could have died of old age, but he chose to die on a cross. He chose to take on the worst of betrayal and abandonment and torture and abuse and injustice, so that anyone who experiences those things know that God experienced it too. I mean, God didn't have to experience it to know it, because he's God, but he let himself experience it so that we could know that he knows what that is, right?
And we have to emulate that for each other too. And so, because on Easter, on Holy Saturday, this is such a small example, but I got a tweet from somebody who was having a rough time and didn't think that they were going to be able to find that Easter joy. And it was the same thing. It was like, I can't solve your problem. I wanted so bad to solve it for this person. I don't even know all the problem, but I wanted them to I felt their suffering or whatever. But the only thing you or I could do was just be like, I'm here for you, and legitimately enter in prayer with them for a while, and just offer that solidarity and trusting that, again, in the end, the Lord has a place for all of that suffering, even if we can't solve it.
Yeah, I think solidarity in other suffering is so important, and knowing how to really show that is also important, and practicing it. And I know that when I've been in situations where I've needed to be consoled by someone, sometimes the way that people tried to console me wasn't actually showing solidarity. It was more discomfort with my need for consolation. But really just being there and not saying it's okay, don't cry, or it'll get better. Or even sometimes it can be really grating to hear God will bring good out of this, you'll find a silver lining. Just being present with someone and acknowledging where they are and helping them ask God for Easter joy. And that is the process, is Christ by suffering transfigured our suffering. And so we meet him in the suffering, not just as an intellectual exercise, but as a Jesus, come meet me here. And that is really hard to do, when you're in the moment and you're feeling awful. But Matt Capodiaconal wrote a really good piece about this that we have on our site this week too. That's actually about how to find joy, especially in the midst of the pandemic that we're still in. And he gives some concrete prayer tips from the spiritual exercises. So if people are kind of wanting something more to steps to follow, not that there's a great step for offering things up, but I think that's a really good read this week too.
Yeah, I haven't read it yet. I'll have to check it out. When I'm done petting the bunny.
This brings me joy.
I know.
I love how preparation for the live show is me catching up on all the articles from WPI that I haven't read yet.
It's a good like practice. It's like, okay, we're gonna talk about stuff on the site. Let's make sure we've read all the things on the site. No. But I mean, that is exactly like how Easter joy happens, is by asking Christ for it, not like spontaneous. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't have a pet bunny, and I'm not really a pet person anyway.
You don't know what you're missing. Hey, I'm not a pet person either, by the way, just FYI. Okay. But 13 years I let my kids convince me for a rabbit. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not a pet person. I just have pets. I mean, that makes sense.
I have kids. For the longest time.
That has always been my line.
Yes.
Like, I don't have pets. I have kids, and now my kids are asking for a pet. And I'm like,
exactly. It's terrible. So anyway, go ahead. I digress.
But Easter joy, like, I think sometimes we expect it to like arise spontaneously as like just well up inside, like, oh, I feel so happy right now because I'm having jelly beans or whatever. And sometimes we do like receive joy, but I think if we are able to understand, like Matt talks about in his post, that joy is always a grace, like it's a gift given to us by God, like then we'll be able to recognize those moments where Christ is giving us joy in unexpected ways, and we will learn how to ask for it, because it's okay to ask for it.
It's okay to ask for it.
Especially if you're having a really tough time this Easter, it is good for you to ask Jesus to bring you joy.
Well, and learning that things are not, like, I think sometimes we think things are mutually exclusive that are not. So it's not mutually exclusive to accept maybe you're in a year of suffering and hardship, and those can be very trying, right? It's not a mutually exclusive to try to approach that like heroically, right, and accept that suffering, to also saying like, Lord, please, like, I would like some experience of Easter joy. Can you send me something? Because the Lord wants good things in our lives. So I do think sometimes we get caught up in thinking that, like, you know, we always have to choose between two things. You can also ask for joy and then also be resigned to if that's not what the Lord has for you this year or whatever too. But yeah, definitely, like, you know, it's yeah.
Okay, speaking of joy, we have
nice glasses, Mike!
So here's the thing, my glasses were, look at how thick these things are.
Oh my gosh,
smart!
So I look smart all of a sudden. SMRT, smart.
I have never seen you look so smart, Mike. Hey, Mike, really did you watch the show? How did we do?
You guys did great. Patrick did great. You know, a lot of you didn't talk about me enough, so I'm sorry, Phyllis. I don't have a collar on right now. And Patrick, if you were ever on the podcast again, just know, collared shirt for all the men.
I forgot to. That was my fault. I did not inform Patrick ahead of time about the collared shirt rule.
So yeah, so I had. So it turns out, so I showed up. Like, so the specialist was different than the surgeon, and I show up, and they're like, "Yeah, the specialist didn't tell us which eye we're supposed to operate on," and I was like, "Eye." They're like, "Yeah, you got to come back and get the other one."
I have two eyes.
Isn't that kind of important?
Like, they didn't prep me at all. Like, I didn't know. Like, I assumed because it was eye surgery, I could eat beforehand, and I did. But, like, seriously, I had they're just like, I was like, should I wear contacts? But no, like, so my glasses were broken. So there's a website called $39glasses.com.
Are we sponsors now?
Hang on. How much are the glasses on this site?
$39, and because I was a new customer, I got $5 shipping. So
wow,
I ordered them up so that I could go in, you know. But yeah, now that I'm like actually looking at myself on the screen, it's like
you look so. I like it. I really like this look on you.
It is 2021.
It's so cute. You're like a hipster now.
No, but I'm a nerd because they're like Coke bottles.
Yeah, but nerds are in.
You would have tape on the middle if you were a nerd. The big glasses, they're so cool.
That was my other glasses. They had tape like right here, and I was like, I'm not going to go. You know, like I can put my contacts back in. They said maybe tomorrow, maybe. Like I
don't do it. I like the glasses.
It's a good look.
Well, no. So I did order a pair of glasses that cost more than $39, but they weren't going to arrive in time for the surgery. So that's why I got
Take
these.
those back. Get your money back.
The 39. Oh, you mean stick with the $39?
Yeah.
It's a good look.
But yeah, I could have paid another $25 for thinner lenses. But that's how they get you, and then so. Yeah.
That's how they get you.
Mike, you sound like a glaucoma patient now. You don't usually, but that is like something old guys say.
Oh, Rachel, that's a serious burn. Yeah, Mike. Now you're as old as your glaucoma matches. Wow, Rachel, thanks. Easter joyful Rachel over there.
I scheduled my COVID shot, so in the waiting room next time, I'll be able to say, and when I get eye number 2 operated on, I'll be like, oh yeah, I got mine, a week ago.
Talk about what brand you got and everything.
Yeah, actually, I'll be able to talk. Who had Paul? You got yours, or who's had theirs?
Mine's tomorrow.
Mine is a week. My first one is a week from today. I don't know which one I'm getting. I assume it's either Moderna or Pfizer because it's.
Yeah, Dan got Pfizer yesterday at the same place I'm going to. So.
Yep, Pfizer comes from my state.
We live in St. Louis, and the R&D headquarters for Pfizer is 15 minutes from my house. And I was driving past, and I pointed it out to my daughter, and she's like, "Whoa, they
I just throw a shot out the window. Play darts, right?"
So I'm getting mine at the metro station. It's a mass site. The M&T Bank Stadium in Baltimore was one of the vaccines.
Yeah, they're making an indoor stadium here.
Y'all are so cool. I'm just going to CVS, but y'all do you.
No, I mean, I wanted to go to CVS. I got 3 texts last week saying, okay, we've got your registration and your tier is now accepted, so you'll be getting an email soon to register through my county. And so I got 4 messages telling me that I would be able to register for.
Okay, this is turning into a very old person conversation. By the
way, we're kind of old.
We're now talking about medication.
Glaucoma.
Everybody should get their vaccine though, so that this nonsense can be behind us.
Mike, did you have a good Easter? I bet you didn't have a bunny.
Yeah, I did. We went to my my brother's parish for the Easter Vigil. He's a pastor.
Oh, nice. Is that cool to get when your brother says mass and you get Jesus? Is that a thing or not really? Or is it sibling rivalry?
Well, so it's if we do a family vacation, it's you don't have to go look for a church.
Oh, that's really convenient.
It's more should I wear socks for mass this morning?
I feel I might. Okay, maybe I'm petty, but now that I think about it. If it was my kid, I'd be like, "Oh, look how beautiful it is. Mass is by my kid." But if it's my brother, I'm like, psh, what?
I feel the same way about that.
No, I understand. It's
bragger. Exactly. I'm making dinner, so.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
Would you go to confession with your brother?
People have asked me that question, and there are 2 conditions under which I would go to confession to my brother. The boat is sinking and the plane is going down.
That's what I thought the answer would be.
I couldn't. That's so weird. I'd go to my kid before my brother.
I do have a story, and I know we're over time, but this is the story of my brother and confession.
So I like how we were right on time. We were scheduled to end at an hour, and then Mike shows up to tell random stories.
Out, and we'll make the podcast 1 hour long.
Bye, Patrick. Mike's on.
So my brother's name is also Patrick, but he spells it with a K at the end, so he's Patrick with a K, unlike Patrick with a C. Anyway, he was in seminary. So my pastor, when he was ordained back in 2012, same class, same seminary class as Father Alex Roach, who is one of our weekly or once a month he gives their Sunday reflection now. And he did he translated that piece about Judas. Anyway, when he was ordained, my mom thought that it would be hilarious if I was to. So there's the whole thing about who like your brother, like the young priest hears his first confession, like sometime ordained on Saturday, and then at the end of his first mass, he gives like a cloth that he like, the cloth that they like,
Manaturgium.
They give whatever that's
thing
to the mom, and the
Manaturgium.
first confession to the dad. So it's like there's this whole like thing with the so he has to like cram a confession in there somewhere during the reception and the end of the day. And anyway, so my mom thought it would be kind of like hilarious, or I don't know if she thought it was hilarious or beautiful, but if I was to be the person to go to him for his first confession. And so then
that sounds really beautiful.
And my pastor thought it was hysterical, right? And so my pastor was very, like, my brother had served as a seminarian under my pastor. So he would, so just like at like daily mass, he'd like throw into his homily, oh yeah, Patrick Lewis, he's going to be ordained soon. He's going to be ordained in June. And Mike there, he's going to hear Mike's confession first. Sort of like some of my Twitter followers, where it's like, they're very earnest. And so like the older church ladies thought that this was the most beautiful thing that they had ever heard of in their entire life. And so like, the day of like the ordination, like I think word has gotten around that, yeah, Mike is going to go to confession to his brother for his first confession. Because like we had babies or something that were acting up or whatever. We showed up to the reception like a little bit late, so the crowd was already there. And I hear like people are coming up to me and they're saying, oh, I hear you're going to confession to your brother.
What are you gonna tell him?
And I'm like, so then I'm heading to the bar, right? And I'm standing in line at the bar, and I'm standing there, and up comes my brother's old college chaplain, Father Bill Byrne, who is now Bishop Bill Byrne of Springfield,
for God's
Illinois.
sake.
And he comes up and he says, Michael, I hear you're going to Patrick for confession. And I said, no. And then he said, and he's like, are you sure? I heard you were going to him for confession. And I'm like, no. And then so he turns to my brother, who's got like 8,000 like old church ladies who are probably like talking his ear off about how I'm going to go to confession to him and how beautiful it is that he's a young priest. And he goes, Patrick, have you heard any confessions yet? And my brother like looks up and he goes, no. And he says, let's go.
So then Father Bill Burns went to confession with him?
So the first person that so as far as I know, the first confession that my brother ever heard was now a bishop. So
that was a really long way to get to that point, Mike.
That's the way I tell stories.
That was the longest story in the world. I think my buddy needs water now.
Well, if the Patreon sponsors want to up their donations, I can tell an even longer version of the
have an all Mike Lewis story.
Wow, you really know how to advertise.
If you want a full hour of Mike Lewis telling Lewis stories, if we get $300,
let's save that for next Lent. We're in the Easter season, Mike. It's time to rejoice.
I thought all of our fans would enjoy my glasses. So
the glasses are cute. I like the glasses. You look so smart. It's a good look.
Smart.
Yeah, Melinda needs glasses so she can.
I'm the only one without glasses in this whole thing.
I was like, I want to join this nerd party here with the glasses.
I'm like the dumb one in the group. I'm like.
Well, you're the one who got the laser correct.
Those were your words, Melinda.
Yeah, those are your words. I didn't say that.
Okay. No one else said that.
Okay, Mike plugged Patreon. Anything else we need to
subscribe?
Yeah, subscribe to our podcast wherever you're watching this. That's all we got for this week.
Happy Easter!
Happy Easter, everyone. We will be back next week. Bye.
Goodbye.